Welcome back to this special edition of The Dental Guys. I'm John, the Dental Guy.
And I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And this has been an amazing time here at the Academy of Osseointegration meeting in Charlotte 2024. And we are definitely living up, I think, to the meeting title here of going beyond the boundaries. You know, we've seen some new things, some things that are challenging the way we think. And, you know, one of the things that we haven't seen quite as much of is the 1v1, you know, battles on stage. And so I kind of think we have the right guy to sort of talk about some things that maybe we've heard different perspectives on, but maybe we could try to compare, contrast, and maybe settle some things today on controversies in implant dentistry.
I'm ready to settle it. And it's no greater person than one of our longtime friends of the Dental Guys podcast. Welcome, Mark Ludlow. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thanks. Mark, tell us what you're doing. For those who don't know who you are, what are you up to? Where are you?
Yeah, so I'm at the University of Utah now. Moved back to Salt Lake about 2.5 years ago or so, and I'm, a prosthodontist there. I'm section head of a number of things there, and we're just having a good time.
So you went from the beach to the snow.
I went from the beach to the snow. I like snow. I like mountains.
I was going to say, that's always been what you've loved. I've known you a long time, and I could always find you on a bike or on a snowboard, right? Yep. And I'm going to guess you're right back to your old ways.
Tomorrow we'll be snowboarding with the kids. Yes,
that's
beautiful.
Awesome.
So, yeah,
love
beautiful.
It.
Well,
love
I think that as I mentioned, as we're kind of introing the show, we had talked about this because you're going to be discussing just in a little while. On the main podium, some of the challenges in prosthodontics, implant prosthodontics. But what I really want to focus on and some things we've talked a lot about are some kind of bigger picture controversies in implant dentistry overall. What are some areas that you kind of are like, you know what, we've talked about this a long time. Let's maybe put some of these things to bed that are commonly brought up as controversial that you maybe don't see as controversial. You see as, hey, this is something we kind of know enough to be able to make a judgment on. Let's talk through some of that with us.
I mean, there's a number of them, right? I mean, we could do this for the next 12 hours and not even hit them all. I think a couple of the things that we'll talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about some digital stuff. I mean, one of the things that I think is, and I'm going to bring this up, is one of the most fundamentals is just, I think dental implants has become almost a commodity. We've kind of forgotten about that there really are differences in screws. There's differences in parts that go into those screws. There's lots of differences in materials, but we kind of think everything's the same, everything works, we just shove it in there and it'll be okay. And again, this one's $300 cheaper than this one. I'm going to use that because it's fundamentally the same. But the reality is, implant dentistry is not a commodity. There are fundamental differences in all the different things that we're putting in a patient. I think we really need to understand the science of what's going on in there and understand what we really are putting in someone and how that actually works.
So let's kind of dive into that, because I think it is probably the biggest question or the biggest thing people make these categorical statements about. Either that all implants are sort of the same, or that, there's one implant that rules them all. So let's talk about, at very least, if we could make some of those statements as to what should we be looking at. Because we were talking about this last night. A new clinician gets out of their residency program, and they are going to come to the AO, and they're going to walk around, and they're going to see all of these designs and companies and surfaces. So what are some things that we know from the literature that do work better than others when it comes to implant designs?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is, again, that person, whether they're coming out of residency, whether they're a GP just coming into this without that background, is you really need to do a little bit of research on what you're putting in someone and understand what's going on in them. I mean, it was funny. My wife and I bought a new fridge about a month ago. We researched the living shiz out of this thing, every review, everything for a fridge. And then I look at the first implant system I bought, almost 20 years ago at this point. And I went to this hands-on thing, and you can do it, and look at how easy it is, and it's only this cost. And I didn't know jack diddly about what I was actually putting in, other than it was easy, and it was like $200 to $300 cheaper than this other one. And that was a terrible thing on my side, because again, I had that same philosophy is, well, it doesn't matter, you shove a screw in there and it works. But I think the reality of some of the things to look at when we are examining the implants is, first off, you could take two of the exact same implants that look the same from the outer perspective, to where you've got them in your hand, you can't physically see a difference, but the bone can, because microscopically the surfaces are wildly different from one to another. And I think those surfaces do an incredible job of influencing the cells there, because the reality is sometimes we think of implant dentistry as we're just putting an implant into a hole, or it's almost like drilling into a wall, but it's not. It's a biologically active system. And what those surfaces do, some recruit quicker than others. Some we've seen from systematic reviews and whatnot have been able to show significantly better bone retention. And they're, again, I think that's where you begin, is really looking at the screw from a surface perspective and a connection perspective, because the connections are all different as well. And you've got to, even within the same implant line, you can get different connections, and those also influence bone loss, complication rate, different things of that nature.
It's confusing, and I think for a budding clinician, someone coming out of residency or coming out of school, maybe they take a course post-graduate, and they go to a course and they see something that they're taught on there, then they go back and their senior doctor saying, well, I've been using this system for 20 years, and they fall into this trap of like, well, I just got to use this, or I just have to use that, with very little training in the understanding of this. How do we train dentists to understand what is best and how to choose an implant for the patient?
Yeah. Well, I think that is the challenge, right? Because, again, we just say, oh, screw, shove it in, we're good. But I think when you really start understanding the interaction of the biology of the bone relative to the screw, and get rid of this paradigm of, we just go to Home Depot, we get a screw and shove it into, a stud, two extremely different things. And we kind of think of it as that Home Depot analogy. But from a clinician's side, once you realize that there are things which do interact with this live, vital bone that your patient has, then you can start to ask yourself the question, well, what does influence it, and what does this one do relative to this one, and what does this one do? And I think that's where you just got to start the discovery. But it's that old adage, you don't know what you don't know. And if you haven't really thought about that interaction specifically, then it's really hard to start asking those questions.
I want to maybe get a little bit more kind of maybe brass tacks on that, though, in a good way. So let's, for the sake of today, because I think a lot of our listeners and a lot of the folks here at the AO have made, many of them, a transition to bone level implants over time, right? So I think we can kind of say that's become the norm for most people. So if you're looking at the whole wide range of bone level implants, and with bone level implants, we know we're going typically for a subcrestal placement. So at that point, as we start going subcrestal, placing our implants potentially more deep, we've heard lots of discussion about how much the connection might matter, okay? But I also have seen studies where it's sort of skewed because the placement depth of the implant influences the bone stability as well.
Correct.
So if we don't have, for instance, enough soft tissue thickness, then we see bone resorption in some cases, potentially more like Linkevicius studies. So what connections should we be looking at? We don't have to name manufacturers, but just what commonalities should we be looking for as we're choosing a bone level implant?
Well, and I think the other thing you have to look at relative to these is sometimes you read papers and, this one says this, this one says this, and, and you've got to really look at the N as well, like how many are in this. And I think it's pretty darn clear if we look at internal hex versus external hex, and when we really start parsing down those internal hexes into a just standard internal hex versus a conical type seal or a Morse taper type seal, is what you see is those conical type seals seem to be trending to being able to retain the bone better. You have significantly less technical complications if you look at the systematic reviews, significantly less bone loss. And I think one of the biggest ends is, it just came out last year with the AO, was the Schoenbach's paper. And that paper, they have 45,000 implants in that thing. And what they saw was the two best types of connection that actually held the bone the best were the Morse taper conical type connection and actually the bone or the tissue level implant. And those two showed significantly less bone loss over time versus a standard internal connection or an external connection.
So can we say, maybe as a conclusion, to sort of put this to bed a little bit, that we have to choose between either keep the microgap away from the bone completely with tissue level and avoid even the question of microgap, or we should choose an implant that has the best possible conical Morse taper connection? Do you feel like strongly 100%. That way? Okay.
100%.
And the deeper we're placing our implants, the
more you need that.
That starts to matter.
Yeah, you
Okay.
bet. Because that's a bigger lever arm and you need a tighter connection.
Okay. Well, I think that hopefully helps maybe our listeners to start thinking about, depending on the type of implant you want to use, a tissue level, a bone level, some things to think about. So let's maybe change the subject then to digital. You kind of alluded to that earlier, and I know it's been something you've done a lot of work with over the years, is trying to look at the role of digital kind of overall,
right,
but especially trying to develop full arch workflows that are fully digital. And it's been sort of this holy grail that many people have said, oh, will we ever get there? Do we need to always go back to the analog verification jig? And you made
what?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
So what you mentioned something the other day about when's the last time that you had used the verification jig? Can you remember what year that was, Mark?
I mean, I think it was probably 2012. This is the last time I've done a verification jig. That being said, there were 2 resident cases that I know they jacked it up. So I was like, you need to build a verification jig. And they're like, well, no, my impression's perfect. I'm like, build the verification jig. Came back, they're like, doesn't fit. I'm like, no shiz. Like, I saw it when you were doing it, right? That's why I had you build this. But yeah, the whole point of a verification jig is to verify your cast. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the point. With digital, are we verifying a cast? I mean, are we compensating for changes in impression material, different expansions and contractions of the material, the stone, etc.?
Not as many variables.
Well, Mark, we're exchanging one variable for another. The variability of analog and the variability of software and the ability of even the scanner we know.
Correct.
Right, and how it captures data right down to the user and how they use the scanner. So not only do we have the variables of impression setting time, the type of material, how you did it, what type of impression coping you use, whether you use a splinted, impression coping situation,
closed tray,
closed tray or open tray, whatever. We've got all these variables here, and then we come over to the digital side. And it just seems like we've got more variables too to deal with, and
they're different variables.
They're different
100%.
variables, and not everything's the same.
Yeah,
there's so many different softwares out there, so many different ways of doing this, algorithms and all that. Are we running backwards or are we running forwards? And how do we calibrate people going forward?
Well, it's interesting you're talking about calibrating people, and you were talking about the user being a variable, because the reality is if you remember back to the first time we took impressions, I mean, it was us together, first time taking impressions on each other.
That's true.
And the reality is we sucked back then.
That's right.
Okay? But nowadays, we've all taken impressions so long, it's easy. We can do this, put it in, we're good. A lot of times people pick up scanners for the first time, and because they're good at conventional impressions, they think I should be able to do this in 2 seconds. But the reality is what we see is in different scanners, we actually have a publication on this that look at a rookie versus an experience. And we looked at, I think it was 6 different scanners in that, and saw that there were some scanners that really made the learning curve significantly less, to where the rookie was scanning as well as us advanced scanners. There were other scanners where there's a wide gap between the rookie and the experienced scanner. And so I think the scanner can help one get better at it and really shrink that learning curve. But there are some scanners which are, I mean, even I pick it up. I've been scanning since 2006, and they're wicked hard to use. You know what I mean? That's just the reality. So again, there are a lot of variables in it. And again, it would be a similar thing to the first time you take a full arch impression was rough for you. But then you get used to it, and you get good at it, and it's a similar thing with the scan.
So where's the training coming from? We hear from our laboratory now that
nowhere.
That's the point here. Is the
Nowhere.
controversy here is that there is so much. There's no training at all. There's lack of support from these companies.
100%.
And it's falling back to the people that are seeing these problems, which is the laboratory.
Correct.
The laboratory is taking the blunt blow of garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
But
the laboratory's been taking that blow even in the analog.
I agree.
You know?
But now we're seeing a bigger problem, because now you're in private practice. You're not in an educational setting. You have to take time away to practice these things, and we don't have the support from
and I
companies.
would say scanners are less forgiving in a lot of ways.
Agreed.
And so there's
especially with conventional crown or bridge.
Yes, that's right. You either see it or you don't.
Correct.
And I think that now, I mean, just in JPD the last couple months, there was a new article about scan paths and what's the best way to actually to go through the scan, and it varies by scanner. And you kind of alluded to this the other day. But to kind of bring that maybe all together, because I think, like you said, we could talk for 12 hours about all the variables. But let's assume, for the sake of today, that the scan path, you have the correct parts and pieces. You have a laboratory that understands how to put everything together. Is it possible to create a full arch digital workflow that is as good, and what I mean by that is accuracy-wise, to where we can feel good that we're going to turn those screws and they're going to go in passively?
Yeah, I 100% would say yes. And again, that seems to be borne out in the literature as well. There's one paper I'm going to show, in a couple hours when I'm on there, but a Marshaha paper from last year, which looked at conventional versus digital relative to full arch with tilted implants and straight implants. And it was looking at the difference. And what it saw was, it was interesting, the trend, which it was showing, and they kind of said in the paper, they're like, oh, digital's better, because that's what the trend was. But you look at the significance, and there wasn't a significance between the two. We know that they both work well, okay? And in the right hands, they can work great. Do I tell people to start on a lower arch hybrid? No bloody way, because that's going to be the most difficult thing with the tongue coming up, everything like that. That is a hard scan. If you start somewhere, start on the upper. But again, with these things, I don't think there's much question anymore as relative to accuracy, because when we look at our work, when we look at various other people's work, scanners across the board from our last paper last year was, we're about the 40 micron range. Okay, from the best scanner to the worst scanner, we just pour them all together, mix it together. We're about 40 microns cross arch, full arch. And that is pretty astounding. And when we look at the misfit that would have to go on, with your prosthesis to not be passive anymore, we don't really know what that number is. So,
well, the concerns that I have right now are we have went from adoption rates less than 20% prior to 2020 as scanning. Now we're pushing 50% to 60% adoption of scanning.
Even higher.
Or even higher in certain situations. And we have no training.
Correct.
And I look to the academy as an opportunity, and I look to you, Mark, because, Mark, you are the expert in all of these different types of scanners. When we talk off camera, you can tell us intricacies. And I think there needs to be some forum, and it may be the AO, maybe it's in Seattle next year, where we have a hands-on scanning workshop. And it's agnostic to a brand, because I really need someone to pare this down for our dental community. Because if we introduced Improgum years ago as the #1 full arch impression material, I mean, it is the gold standard in all the PROS journals. It's the thing that everyone compares to when they look at impression material, even to today.
Yeah.
How are we comparing scanning? What is the baseline? Are we still comparing it to analog? That seems like what we're doing here. We need someone to go forward here, use this technology, and I think that you have an opportunity with the academy. And I'm putting the pressure on you, Mark.
Not turning that screw at all.
That's right. Yeah. But it was interesting just because I think that what a hot topic has been in especially the last say 6 months to year, is photogrammetry.
Yeah.
And I don't want to dive too deep into that because it's a whole other discussion we don't have time for, but it was interesting as we talked just before yesterday about, and you said, it's interesting. It has its uses. It is validated.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily need it for the healed ridge, full arch digital workflow. And that was very interesting because that's been something I think everybody's been talking about.
Yeah.
But you're saying that scanners, for the most part, and you have to know your scanner, and like Wes said, can accomplish that with themselves, intraoral scanners, without the need for additional technology.
I agree 100% with that, because the reality is, again, the scanner is good enough. Okay, you've got all the other variables which we've talked about. Where I think photogrammetry is needed is if we're placing the implants and we want to go ahead and scan the day of surgery and build the temporary right then. The bloody field, especially on different scanners, because some scanners will process that a little bit, but others won't. The bloody field is hard.
That's right.
And when you're in a bloody field, it is nice having that second set of eyes that photogrammetry gives you. But that being said, it's really interesting with photogrammetry. You still need an impression, or you still need a scan. So you're already still doing these things.
That's right.
So you're just adding another variable.
It's another variable. It's another tool that you have to buy when you might already have something that does the same job.
Correct.
And I like what you said is, like, we get down to this nitty gritty of, like, well, my scanner can scan cross arch and the accuracy is less than 20 microns. And like, well, what's a red blood cell?
8.
8.
Yep.
And
That's what I'm bringing up in about 20 minutes.
And crown fit margins, the American Dental Association has, said that crown fit margins are, 100 to 120 microns is plenty acceptable.
Yep.
And shows long lasting results with that.
Right.
And yet we're quabbling over 10, 20, 30, 40 microns here. I mean, it really is it clinically significant.
Right. And that's what we get into with all of this, is because sometimes, we go over this and I tell people that 40 and they're like, 40? Well, freak, man.
Yeah.
That's not working.
I mean,
and I'm
your
like,
scanner's
dude,
not
I'm
great.
46, man. That's a small freaking number, at this stage.
Stop
Okay.
talking
When I
like
was
that.
little, that was like, I was like, 40 shiz, man. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Now I'm 46. I'm like, geez, that's a tiny number.
Yeah.
And the reality is, again, putting it in context with other stuff that we're seeing is, the red blood cell, a hair. That's between 100 and 180 microns. We're talking about 40. I mean, come on. How accurate do we need to get it?
Well,
and the answer is we don't know.
We don't know.
Right now.
But we are at the point where we can say that we can rival, at very least, with excellent accuracy and precision, what we've been able to do. And I think that's a major thing that we've been searching for many, many years. So it's pretty cool.
Well, and I think just kind of to end on that is the other thing is it's not just the accuracy. From a lab side, how easy is it to cross arch mount everything in the right occlusion, in the right video, and not jack that up?
That's right.
Okay. Whereas with scanning, everything comes stacked for you like that. So there's a lot of things. My occlusion, I'll be 100% honest. When I look at digital versus analog, my occlusion is 1,000 times better from the digital side, because I can do little things like, have them go tap, 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 scan it, and then look at the heat pattern and verify before my patient even leaves that is the true bite.
That's
and
right.
I've been getting significantly better bites with those things than I ever was, because you run into all the cross-arch mounting variables. So there's a lot that goes into building these things.
For sure. And a lot of steps that can potentially be eliminated, not because we're just trying to eliminate steps, but because we're actually getting more accurate. We can
Correct.
do more rapid prototyping, all of these things that are
And
allowing
transferring
us.
more data.
Yeah, we get more data at a time. So, well, I know you've got to run here in a little bit to present, so we'll let you go. But thanks for being with us. We look forward to having a lot more of this conversation in the future with you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and like I say, I agree. We got to have this scanning thing where everyone can try different things, see how they work, and get really good training, because the reality, I do think with digital especially, it's lacking big time.
It is.
So.
Yeah. Well, it's been another good one. And if you've been listening to this, obviously we want you to go check out what Mark Ludlow is doing. And, he's publishing some really interesting things and working on some really interesting things. And that's who comes here. That's why we're here. That's why we recommend that everyone that's listening to this, get involved with an organization like this, that they can come and actually hear from the top names, the top ideas, and really what is the best idea, and may it win, right? And that's what we're all about with the scientific method. So for Mark, for Wes, I'm John. We are the Dental Guys.